Are you a businesswoman who is finding it challenging to get your ideas across and make a point? Welcome to Speakers Who Get Results with Elizabeth Bachman, a podcast dedicated to helping women get the visibility they want, whether making a speech or talking in a meeting. Every week, get valuable lessons from Elizabeth or learn from her roundtable conversations with experts and speakers on how to make a difference, not just a point. On to the show with your host, Elizabeth Bachman.
Hello, and welcome to Speakers Who Get Results. I'm Elizabeth Bachman, your host, and this is the podcast where we talk about leadership, presentation skills, communication challenges. And today we're going to talk about one of the useful things to know. We're doing a series of practical, useful tips with my guest, Doug Hardy. Before I get into Doug's official bio, though, let me invite you to see where your presentation skills are strong by taking our free 4-minute quiz at speakforresultsquiz.com. That's www.speakforresultsquiz.com. And that's where you can see where you're a strong presenter and where perhaps a little bit of support could help you get the results you need and the recognition that you deserve. My guest today is Douglas Hardy. He is an old friend of mine, and I had him on the podcast a few weeks ago to talk about a book that he'd worked on as a ghostwriter. And then I thought, maybe there's some of you listening who are thinking about writing a book, but you're busy. You've got a full job. So you might consider working with a ghostwriter. I thought, let's bring Doug back and ask him, what's it like to use a ghostwriter? Why use a ghostwriter? And what's going to make the difference? His official bio is: Douglas Hardy is a business strategist and writer, specializing in the topics of human innovation and work collaboration. To date, he has written 18 books and numerous articles for industry and academic leaders, including Deloitte, Elkus Manfredi Architects, WorkHuman, Monster.com, Bentley University, and Babson College. Previously, over the course of 20 years, Doug has been a media executive at the New York Times, Random House, AT&T New Media, and others. His current writing appears under client bylines in Forbes, Fast Company, Inc., and other publications. Doug's recent areas of research include organizational culture, technology, leadership, employee engagement, pandemic and post-pandemic workplace issues, workspace design, entrepreneurship, and artificial intelligence applications in industry and in the employment economy. So today we're going to talk about what's it like to work with a ghostwriter, what you should know, and how to make it work. On to the interview with Doug Hardy. Doug Hardy, welcome back to Speakers Who Get Results.
Thanks. Good to be here again.
Yeah, well, I have to say, as I said in the intro, when we had our first conversation about the book that you co-authored, Who's in Your Room, and I said, what is it about being a ghostwriter? And I watched you light up as we were talking. And I said, all right, we have to have a whole other conversation about working with a ghostwriter. But before I do that, let me ask you, who would be your dream interview? If you could interview someone who is no longer with us, who would it be? What would you ask them? And who should be listening?
Oh, well, first of all, that is the most unfair question anyone can ask.
You only get to choose one.
I went through probably 40 possibilities, Shakespeare, Lincoln, who is it going to be? But I thought that right now, one of the most interesting conversations as an interview, one of the most interesting interviews would be if I could go back 2,500 years and interviews Siddhartha Gautama, who was the Buddha.
Buddha,
And
okay.
what I would ask the Buddha, if I spoke Pali, would be, let's talk about the intersection between modern science-based, brain-based psychology and this extraordinarily logical system that you came up with using the only technology that you had, which was your own mind, which very closely parallels modern understandings of how the mind works. And I think it would be a fascinating conversation to how do you reach enlightenment in a non-supernatural intervention that looks so much like complete awareness that only in the last 100 years or so science has been grappling with. I think that would be a fascinating conversation about that convergence.
And I got a little lost as you're talking about that. I've known you for many years, and you often lose me in the way you talk about things. That's probably something that made sense on the page, Mr. Writer, my friend. And can you say that in a simpler way? You're the king of metaphors here.
Well, Buddha said many things, but his last lesson was, look to your own experience. What do you see? What do you experience? What's really going on outside in the world and inside in your mind? And that's how you will arrive at truth. And you can call it religious truth or scientific truth or so forth. What's remarkable, and I think this is why science is so interested in meditation these days, is that when you strip away a lot of the cosmology of modern Buddhism, it reads like a manual to how the mind works.
Mm-hmm.
That the mind is restless, that the mind is always seeking novelty, the mind is always looking out for danger and opportunity and so forth, and that we get caught up in these stories we tell ourselves all the time. And our experience is both part of the world outside of us, but it's also these long stories and metaphors that we tell ourselves all through the day, all day long. That's how we comprehend the world. That's the conversation I'd like to have. Why is brain science with electrodes running all around your head looking an awful lot like the basic truths of Buddhism, and I should say the basic truths of many of the great world religions?
Oh, what fun.
Is that still too complicated?
No, actually, that was a thank you very much. And I really wanted to talk to you about that because one of the things that I have loved about our friendship for many years is how you are very good at taking complicated ideas and refining them into something that's readable and understandable. And I wanted to talk to you about working as a ghostwriter, because it's one of the things that and there are a lot of people who are out there writing content, but you've spent the last 20 plus years helping other people figure out what their thought leadership is and then distilling it into a readable format. So I wanted to talk to you, first of all, why is it important to have really compelling content? Why does it matter?
Oh, golly. Well, I have a friend who says, with a great deal of irony, thought leadership is really simple. It only needs two things: thoughts and leadership. The problem is a lot of people think they have both, and they don't really. They're just going along, regurgitating what they read in the past. They aren't coming up with novel insights or other things, or they don't know how to lead.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone has some really interesting new observations or new ways of saying them, and if someone really has the qualities of leadership, which is, I heard a few years ago, a perfect definition of leadership, and it sounds glib, but bear with me, said, a leader is someone who has followers.
Ah.
In other words, leaders come in all kinds of stripes and colors and affects and so forth. George Washington and Steve Jobs, not exactly the same guy. Clara Barton and Marianne Williamson, not the same people at all, but real leaders, right? So, content. Those of us who started out in the book trade used to complain the word content, but it's a good word in a world of multimedia.
Mm-hmm.
Content is images, content is words, content is so forth, but it's expressing concepts, right? So content confirms in thought leadership that you really are a leader. It's the proof that you are what you say you are. In the same way that the track record of an investor, their
Mm-hmm.
returns over many, many years proves that they're good, rather than the way they talk about investing.
Mm-hmm.
Content proves that your experience and your insights and your applying experience to different situations puts you in a position of leadership. So that's it. It really simply affirms and verifies that you are a leader.
Uh-huh. For the sake of one's visibility in the world, certainly having, creating great content, having a book, publishing a book is a great, more than a calling card. But, I've always been someone who's better off talking than she is writing. So you can talk it out too, and then have somebody to help you write it so that it's good writing. But that figuring out what your ideas are and what's your way of saying it is a great way to raise your visibility. So people go, oh, well, there's Doug Hardy. He's the person who wrote such and so. Or there's Elizabeth Bachman. She created the concept X and concept Y, concept Z. So it does take work. Why is it worth getting help from a professional who just writes? It's more than just writing, but whose main function is to write.
It's worth it for the same reason that a CEO of a technology company has a chief technology officer, or a chief marketing officer, or the head of a biopharma firm has a head of research. People who are spending most of their time leading other people are subject matter experts, as they say, in leadership, but they aren't necessarily great at communicating, and they aren't necessarily great at recognizing which of their messages are going to resonate best with the people who need them, and which are most useful. I think this is where your expertise in speaking and mine in writing have something in common.
Oh, yeah.
For years before I was a ghostwriter, I was an editor, and someone once said, "What makes you a good editor?" And I said, "I have tremendous empathy for the reader." That's not sympathy. By empathy, I mean I can put myself in the place of a reader anytime I'm reading a piece of writing. I'm thinking, how is this affecting me? What am I going to take away from this? How does this apply to my life or my situation or my problem or my ambitions? I think that that's a specialized set of skills. Communication, certainly. In my case, writing. In your case, speaking.
Mm-hmm.
But also understanding which of the ideas are very, very familiar and therefore not necessarily high value, which ones are novel and will really grab people's attentions, and which ones are entertaining and energizing,
Mm-hmm.
or provocative and thus energizing, or persuasive. You know, great salespeople know that it's the relationship you build over time that makes a sale. I think people have relationships with what they read,
Oh,
and people have
absolutely.
relationships with what they
I
hear.
I always call that strategic empathy. To put yourself, the rule
Mm-hmm.
number one is to know your audience and put yourself in the shoes of your listeners or your readers. And why should they care? Who are you speaking to, and what does that matter? So,
You know,
yeah.
a leader. So when I work with someone, I'll sit down and ask a few questions, and we'll talk for maybe 90 minutes. And what they don't realize is that some of what they're saying is really intriguing to a certain audience, or really follows a thread that we're trying to create here, follows a path, and they're thinking ahead to the next thought. One of my clients years ago used to say, the question that I always dread from you, Doug, is, oh, wait a minute, say more about that.
Right.
Because they don't realize they've just said something really profound.
Uh-huh.
And because they're used to it, they've been thinking about it for years. And suddenly they say, why do I believe that?
Uh-huh.
Now we're getting somewhere. Tell me a story about when that happened to you.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
I think
And go on.
I just you're going to say, I think this is a very important point because we live with our thoughts, and so having somebody else who can say, wait, that's really important, that's new, or maybe you say, well, everybody knows that, but not everybody knows that,
Mm-hmm.
or maybe you've put it together in a different way.
There's also the matter of craft. You know,
Uh-huh.
I've spent 40
Craft as in skill and technique.
craft as in skill and technique. I will listen to a client and say, this is the format I suggest.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, I'm finishing a book with the CEO, and the book is a format or a narrative arc that I've never used before.
Mm-hmm.
Because I've never worked with a person quite like this before. And I changed the entire structure, literally the structure of the book, moving it from 6 chapters to 11 chapters. And I won't get into the details, but it's a really novel construction of both narrative and case building, because this person's story is so compelling and so unusual. And that's their voice.
Mm-hmm.
Their voice is different from other CEOs I've worked with who say are very data driven.
Mm-hmm.
And so let's stick with data and messages like that. So the expertise of the ghostwriter is to understand the concepts and the stories and also the formats that your intended audience are going to receive best and are going to receive in their own way, but are an extension of your leadership. You're leading them someplace. You're convincing them of something. You're making a case that you want them to see is an important case.
When you are, I guess I want to come back to that. But first of all, let's just talk about when does it make sense to say, okay, I'm going to do a book, or if not a book, I'm going to do articles. I want to get my ideas out into the world in some sort of written form.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When does it make sense to do that? And when does it make sense to hire someone, the specialist, the professional?
It makes sense when you're ready to commit to a long-term self-marketing program or marketing program for your ideas. And by marketing, I mean the full media array, whether it's social or a book or video or whatever, but also really thinking it through. What's your message? What endures? What is going to make you stand out? What are you really better at talking about than anyone else? Typically, that's your experience and how it proves your points. And I don't mean memoir. I mean you, the client, or you, the person working with a ghostwriter, have to understand that this is not novel writing. This is not, well, I think it's good craft, but you're not trying to make great art. What you're trying to do is bring these ideas to the widest possible audience. And that's a marketing program.
What do you say when someone says, I think this is something, but it's been said before. What if somebody says, I don't know if this is new or unusual enough? Am I, do I have a new idea? How can I tell if this is a new idea?
I think good ghostwriters are also really good researchers.
Okay.
Like again, the marketing metaphor, you're going to research the competition. So there are always new ways to say things. We look at business bestsellers and we think, well, I've seen that message before. But once in a while, something comes along that's data-driven, for example, or has a truly dramatic turnaround story, or is a story of an individual so compelling that their life could be written like a novel. It's just that exciting. And a good ghostwriter will speak very candidly with you about what's real, what's not, what's publishable and what's not, who cares. They can answer the who cares question, or does anybody care? And I think a truly good ghostwriter knows the media landscape. So they'll say, this idea you have is not really a book. It's not going to be 50,000 words to explain, but it could be a series in an online business magazine, a Forbes or an Inc. or whatever. And that's because I keep in touch with those things, and you've got something to say. So let's put together a proposal and then go try to be on the Forbes, is it Leadership Council, I think it's called. You can look that up online. It's strictly an online gathering of experts, but they all publish on Forbes online. Okay.
All right. That's actually a good way of saying it's, to knowing, is it a book? Is it a series of articles? It's a very good, you have choices. And one of the things that I talk about a lot is maybe you start out speaking about it first and then turn it into a book, or maybe it's a book or a series of articles that you've written and now you have to get out there and speak. This is the sort of thing. I work with ghostwriters and editors a lot in terms of what do you want to say? You've got to be able to do both.
We work in a world now that is so different from when I started as a book editor, in that all media intersects with all other media. Who knew that one of the biggest drivers of bestsellers in fiction is TikTok? I'm not even on TikTok, but Book Talk is incredibly effective. Not much for nonfiction, though. Nonfiction is a different animal, and business nonfiction is very specialized.
Yes. Yeah.
That might be a generational thing, by the way.
It might be. Yes, exactly. Uh, how do you pick a good ghostwriter? Say you're curious, you're starting to investigate the idea.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
How do you know who to work with and who not to work with?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, it's a great question because half the key to success is the relationship.
Yes.
Your relationship with a ghostwriter has to be one of complete confidence, complete confidentiality, complete trust, complete candor.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and the collaborations I know that have worked have a couple of qualities that you recognize. One, you really respect each other, and
Mm-hmm.
with one would hope you like each other, and you respect each other's separate expertise. So don't go working with someone who's going to tell you all about your business. Instead, what I would look for in a ghostwriter is someone who is deliberately naive. You know, I
Mm-hmm.
say to people, I'm going to ask you questions, and you're going to say, didn't he do his homework?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to say to you, I've done my homework. I'm asking these questions so that they can be answered in your voice.
Mm-hmm.
You should look at samples of their work and see if they've written for different people and it sounds different.
Mm-hmm.
If it all sounds like the same diction, the same phrases, the same sentence lengths, yeah, that's not as good as someone who sort of captures someone's unique voice. I think the best and, by the way, highest paid ghostwriters at the peak are a slightly different market from mine. They are the memoirists.
Mm-hmm.
There's
Right.
J.R. Moringer, who wrote Prince Harry's autobiography, and he wrote Andre Agassi's autobiography. And he got started as a reporter and also writing his own autobiography, a wonderful book called The Tender Bar.
Mm-hmm.
But if you read those books, they're very different voices. And he spends something like 2 years. He moves to where the client lives and spends 2 years in that neighborhood with them. That's a little too intimate for me and a little too costly, but in any event. So you look for someone, I think after the relationship, I think a certain degree of expertise in the industry or an ability
Mm-hmm.
to come up quickly with it is
Yeah.
good. Certainly endorsements from past clients. That's always something you want to check out. And finally, there's going to be some range of price that you're okay paying. And that's going to be part of the business relationship too.
Mm-hmm. What's the return on investment then?
The return on investment is the same way you measure a marketing program. Are you getting more clients? Are you getting more exposure? Are you getting more media mentions? You won't make a lot of money selling books,
Mm-hmm.
some, but I think most of your clients at their level, it's it's a few weeks salary or a few weeks profits. That's not the point. The point is exposure. The point is to raise your profile.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I will say that for people who are connected to corporations, C-level people, I often contract with their marketing department because what they really want to do is get their ideas in front of their clients and potential clients. It's a great way for customer relations people and go-to-market people to say, here's so-and-so at Nike, here's so-and-so at Apple, here's so-and-so at Walmart. Take a look at this book. It's really, really relevant to your business. And our
Mm-hmm.
CEO wrote it, and we think we should have a conversation about it. So it's in B2B stuff, even B2C, much of it can be thought of as a marketing program.
That's a very good way to put it, because the process, I mean, so you have weeks and months together where you're talking through ideas and you're giving, and then you're going through various drafts of the
Mm-hmm.
book, and then ultimately the book comes out. Um, then there's the whole talking about it, publicity. So I interview authors all the time. Their podcasts are great for that. And it gives you a legitimacy,
right,
to do that. Or I've had clients who've worked out who had a speech. I had one client who had a hard time telling stories, so we created 3 stories, and then she said, "Okay, I'm going to go give a speech." I said, "That's the stories are not the speech. The stories are the illustration. Let's dig down to where are the ideas behind it, and how would these stories would illustrate." It's kind of working backwards, but it's what made sense for her. And frankly, for a lot of people, it's what they're pissed off about, what they're angry about, what really bothers them in their industry, and then say, all right, this is a problem. How would I fix it?
That has driven more successful entrepreneurs than
Yes.
any single cause, looking and saying, this makes no sense at all. And I'm going to figure out an answer to it. You bring up a point that's really important, which is that writing a book or even an article can be a pretty organic process. This is where ChatGPT doesn't quite work yet. And that is, it's back and forth.
Yeah.
So why not start with the stories and say, so if these stories matter to you, what about these stories matters? Or you start with a framework and say, here's the problem we're trying to solve. People have trouble with organizational structures. How can we make organizational structures better? Well, what are the real problems here? And then you find that you're focusing on performance reviews or performance management. And suddenly you can write 50,000 words about performance management, most of which are really original, even though we've all done performance reviews forever and we hate them. So why don't we solve that problem? And a book is a way to work your way through those ideas and say, no, that's not really what I thought, or that is what I thought, or you know what, this sounds an awful lot like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let's look into that. Maybe there's a metaphor here that we really should be using. That's what the conversation is about. And then the writer goes away and writes and then puts it in front of you and you say, yeah, I want to say that, but I don't want to say that. So it's iterative, it's organic, it's lots of fun, it's lots of work.
It is work, but once you have it forever.
Yeah.
So then you have, and then people say, oh, she's the one who wrote that book, da 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 da. And I think, I know. I've heard you say there are a lot of people out there who brand themselves as ghostwriters who have just don't write well, and and sometimes I think nobody cares whether the language is well written or not, and it drives me nuts. That might also be a generational thing, to try to make the language sing, if you will.
If people are going to invest $30 and 20 or 30 hours of their life reading a book, are you just going to shovel, burgers at them, or are you going to give them a really terrific, well-cooked, well-sourced, fresh dinner? I mean, which one are they going to remember, right?
Yes.
I think in any endeavor, but especially in writing and performing, quality is worth the price. Quality is worth the time. Be hard on the process and make a really, really good book. It takes forever. There's a book by the fellow who founded Grubhub, and at the very end of the book, in the acknowledgments, he says, I've built $1 billion company and I've written a book. Writing a book is harder. And then he says, don't laugh. I really have done them both. And writing a book is harder. Now, personally, I think building $1 billion company is harder. But the he's making is that if you're going to undertake a project so personal
Mm-hmm.
and a project so tied to your value, why wouldn't you make it the best possible product you can?
Yes. Yeah.
I
I,
mean,
I love that.
if you ask who will know, well, readers will know, but also you'll know.
Good
You'll
point.
know, right?
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
should be. This is your testament. Even
It's
if
your
you're going to write
legacy.
8 books, it's your legacy, it's your testament. And by the way, if you want to get any notice from the business press or in the other press, it better be well written. It better be original. It better be well researched. It
Mm-hmm.
better be true,
Uh-huh.
because there's an awful lot of books out there and people have a limited amount of time.
Right.
So you do need to stand out.
Mm-hmm. Well, Doug, this has been fascinating and really fun. Um, just out of curiosity, do you have the moments where you finish a conversation and then you jump up and dance around the room saying, they're so smart. They're so smart. I love it. I can't wait to get working on this.
Yes, I don't dance about the room. What I do is I jump up and I go to that window and I look out and I go, oh, wow. I'm going to have to rewrite chapter 2 now because this really changes things and it just gets better. This is what I love about the iterative process. You
Mm-hmm.
know, suddenly someone will say something almost spontaneously and you'll say, oh boy, yeah. Everybody can resonate with that. And I love those moments. Yeah. So when I get that, when I hear a great story, when I hear a great phrase, it's just, even when I write a great sentence, and that doesn't happen too often. I write a lot of good sentences, but when it really comes together, I mean, it's just pure joy. This is
Yeah.
what I love to do.
It's the creative process. I'll have to tell you that the clients that I love to work with, and then we hang up and I jump up and just dance around the room and go and say, I love it. I love it. I love it. I get to work with this. I get to help this person. She's so brilliant. She's so smart, or he's so brilliant. And yes, let's get it out there. So that's what
Don't
keeps me going.
and so I'll ask you a question. There's always that moment with my clients where they get the book, and it's
Yeah.
there, it's in their hands, and it just feels so good. Do you get that moment when you see them finally up there doing their TEDx talk or whatever it is, and you go, nailed it. They
Yes.
nailed it.
Yes. It's when they get out and they do the speech, and we've worked on the delivery. So that's the other thing, is the big difference between a speech and a book is how you deliver the speech, which is a little different every time.
Right.
But hopefully you have practiced it enough so that muscle memory takes you through it. And because you're going to be nervous at the beginning, and you're probably going to be nervous at the end, and maybe even in the middle when you see somebody really important sitting there in the front row and you go, oh, I didn't know he was here, which is what gets the voices in my heads going. When you get up there and you do it, and you see, for me, when I see somebody up there and I see the audience drinking it in, and that's my craft, is we've worked on the craft of how do you deliver it. And we've worked on the craft of shaping the sentences and making the phrases memorable and making it interactive so that people stay awake and are excited and interested. And they walk out there. I think of it as giving them the craft so that they can be open to the art of their message. Just open up and be a channel for delivering this idea. Because we all know that the great ideas, at least in my cosmology, come from somewhere above, from universe or God or higher power, whatever you want to call it. Somewhere there's that spark that makes you go, And then the craft is, how do you channel that in a fashion that people can hear you, in a way that they can take it in that makes sense to them, and watch them going, yes, got it. Wow. That's why I do what I do.
You're reminding me, and I know you know this quote, but in case maybe one or two of your clients or listeners don't, the Speakers Who Get Results reminds me of that marvelous Maya Angelou quote, which is they may not remember what you say, but they will always remember how you made them feel.
Well, and it's a very famous quote. It's become a cliche, but cliches are cliches because they're real.
They're true.
Because it's true.
It's true.
It's true. So
it's true. When you energize a room like that, boy.
Or when you've got somebody reading the book and staying up too late because they can't stop turning the page.
Right.
Yes. Oh, Doug Hardy, this has been such a joy to talk to a fellow craftsperson and someone who, like me, I help people get their ideas out into the world. I really enjoyed it. Thank you for coming back to Speakers Who Get Results to talk about this wonderful craft of ghostwriting. And, if you're somebody who thinks you've got some ideas, then explore them and see, but then get help writing it, because most of us are too close to our own stories to do our own, to write our own stuff. That's where you need an editor, or if you don't have time, you just have a ghostwriter who helps you do it. So.
Thank you. Wonderful show. Great to be on again.
Thank you so much, Doug. This has been Speakers Who Get Results. If you enjoyed this conversation, especially the Doug and I geeking out about the craft, if you enjoyed this conversation or any of our other conversations, please tell your friends, subscribe to us on whatever app you're listening to, subscribe to us on YouTube. We've got a lot of material there. And do us a favor, leave us a message, leave us a good review on Apple Podcasts, because that's the one that people track. And I will see you on the next one.